Mr. Bressers.
Nope.
I have impersonated Bressers. I am his unlikely clone. Euchre.
Clarification.
I like the galactic background though.
Thank you. Haven't I been using this phone? Hang on 1 second. I've got a phone call coming in.
All good. Hi, Michael.
Hello, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. Just enjoying some popcorn, which is perfect right now.
Nice. Yeah, it gives me a bit of downtime. I just got off a different meeting.
Back to back is tough.
Yeah, speaking of Bressers, he made one of the other working group meetings 5 minutes after and 5 minutes before.
Good idea.
I'm really tempted to do that for all of my meetings.
Yeah. It's funny, we just got kind of guidance internally that like that's how we should do it. So switch all of mine over.
It makes a lot of sense because then like you give yourself little breather rooms to get some popcorn or use the bathroom or whatever. So
Yep. Until all meetings just end 5 minutes late because they know that.
yeah. Gosh.
Well, one problem at a time.
Yeah. Well, that's the funny thing, right? Is like everyone always shows up 5 minutes late. So you're like, oh, we'll bump it back 5 minutes then. Oh wow, now they're 10 minutes late. Doing any fun over the weekend?
What do I do over the weekend? I don't know. I have 2 kids, so even when we do nothing, it's still chaos.
Definitely takes a lot of time.
It does. It does. No, I did something fun. What was it? It'll come to me eventually. How about you?
I started pre-thinking about that because I knew that was coming up. Yeah, my mom's birthday was last week, so we celebrated on Sunday. So Sunday was mostly hanging out with family and just kind of relaxing. I'll be honest, I'm really bad at remembering.
Yeah.
Like Saturday is a big old blank slot, and I can't remember what I did.
You know, maybe I have it on my calendar.
Right?
All right, landlady called. Sorry about that. We're having some electrical stuff done, including doorbell wires snapped, and I'm having my office for some reason. I've had my office circuit trip 3 times in the past 3 days. So I've been on meetings and like boom, the whole thing goes dead. And I'm like,
oh no.
Oh. And thankfully I the first time I did it, I thought it was the basement panel, but it's actually a panel it's a sub panel in the apartment, so I can go flip it on real immediately, but it's still like kills everything.
So if you disappear, we know what happens.
Yeah, and last time it happened, I had to my desk lost its positioning. So I had to take my monitor or my desktop out from underneath the thing and put it over there, and then unscrew some things so the whole desk could go all the way down to its full depth and then come back up because it needed
no.
it needed to rehome what like ground was. Yeah, this is a whole nightmare. Anywho, we seem to be having a very small turnout for this this particular SIG. But in order for us to become an official SIG, all we need is to have at least 2 companies showing up to every single meeting. And we have 3 if we count the Linux Foundation. Olga may join us later. She was in a customer call. So we'll see what happens there. Let me ping. Let me ping one more and see if he's joining. Okay, for attendance, because this will help us become a legitimate SIG. Let's do that right now.
I'll be honest, I'm trying to find the meeting notes and I am super lost.
They're in the invite. Manwar said he will be joining shortly. Okay, we do the SIG. Autofix SIG. Hello, Cat. Okay. Let me do the rest of these. Mark them as not present. If you can mark yourself as present if you're here. Let me make these a little bit darker so you can actually see your own name if you are here. Okay. And you got a hotkey for that, Michael?
I just copied it from earlier today.
Fair. All right, meeting agenda. First things first. Do we have any new friends who want to introduce themselves to this particular working group?
Hi, I'm Josh.
Michael, you've not attended this SIG meeting before, so.
Hi, my name is Mike Scavettum. I lead an open source security team at Microsoft and co-lead Alpha Omega. Super interested in getting vulnerabilities fixed at scale. So
yes,
do I help?
Okay. Does anybody want to scribe for the meeting notes?
I'll try my best. Sure.
Great, perfect.
It'll be a group effort.
Do we have any opens?
I made one comment. For where was this section? Oh yeah, for the opt-out, we talked about last time. If somebody does opt out, still assigning an ID.
Yes.
Which, I guess feedback from your perspective on generating the bulk PRs, what would be useful for like an API endpoint or how you actually want to request those kind of IDs?
Good question. The problem currently, well, okay. It's a couple different things we could do. Modern, the way that Modern supports generating pull requests is you can give it a commit job and say, hey, like for this job, or for these projects, generate commits, and here's the pull request body, the GPT key you want to use to sign it, and all that jazz, right? You can provide all that information all at once. And the problem with that is that like each repository can't get like a unique message or a unique sort of thing. But because that was originally driven via the API where you wanted to bulk an operation via the UI, there's no reason why we can't send like for 30, 40, 50 pull requests we're going to generate X number of unique commit jobs where each one has its own unique message. And then we can theoretically, as we're generating the pull request, say, hey, this has been assigned this, by the way, this has been assigned this particular, what's it called?
Identifier.
What?
Identifier.
Yeah. Yes. Good news. GitHub has an API for creating, GitHub has an API for GHSAs now. I've used it. It is not available until tomorrow. I got early access. I have permission from Kate to talk about it. Hi, Kate Catlin. So yeah, so she gave me permission to talk about it specifically. So the functionality that supports upfront is
So it sounds like that can
list
probably
all
take care of...
what?
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say that it sounds like that can probably take care of the need there.
Yeah, so it has support for listing all advisories in a repository that are the repo maintainer can get all the triage draft and published, and then GitHub user can only get the published advisories. Hello, Azim. He's not joining. Hello, Azim. There it is. Okay. If you could toss your attendance on the meeting notes, it will help us get towards our requisite. Yeah, it's fine. You can add, if you add yourself to the meeting notes, then it'll go towards our requisite requirement of how many meetings we need to have multiple vendors at in order for this to become an official SIG. Perfect. So list all advisories in a repository. Get list a single advisory in a repository. Update a single security advisory in a repository with a patch call, which will let you update the information, and then there's post, which is create an advisory in a repository, and then you can also specify credits, and there are webhooks for on a publish of a security advisory, and then if a new private vulnerability is submitted, you can see there's webhooks for those things. There will be support for adding comments, and it was indicated to me that there would not be support for adding collaborators initially in the first pass. It would only support you opening it. The reason that I was thinking that might be useful is every one of these API calls goes against your API rate limit. And so if you could have one user create the GHSA and another user fill it in, right, you'd be using two user, you'd go against that API limit a little slower.
We could just have multiple accounts and pool it. Whatever works.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but you can't add another collaborator. So basically the person that opens the GHSA will be the only person that can modify it currently. Comments are coming. The ability to create a fork is coming as well. So one of the problems that I also ran into that I mentioned to Kate is, so let me read this to you. So if I'm running an Autofix campaign at scale across open source, as long as I use the same exact branch name across all forks, when I force update, then open a pull request. If a pull request is already open, it will just operate as an update instead of creating another duplicate PR. Does that make sense? So basically it operates as because you're using the same branch as the key. The reason this works is because a deduplication key is a branch name. Thus, as long as the branch remains exactly the same, no duplicate PRs are created, except for there is a race condition bug in GitHub where I have actually ended up with 2 pull requests for 1 branch. It's happened like 3 times in the past 1,000 pull requests I've generated. Um, as such, no state needs to be remembered between campaign reruns. But now with GHSAs needing to be created, and these keys are non-deterministically random values, as such, if you want to update the pull request every 2 weeks, you need to persist a mapping of repository to GHSA externally across campaign runs. This might be a just deal with it problem, but it's kind of annoying unless perhaps there's some way to shove it. I mean, the other thought that I had was because you can list all GHSAs against a repository, theoretically you could shove like GitHub supports like comments in the pull request header, or you can put comments in Markdown that are not rendered. And so theoretically in the description, you could put a Markdown comment that says do not remove used for tracking, and then throw an ID in there that's the campaign ID, and that will be the thing that you look up per repository to do the correlation. And so you end up like faking a branch, but with a comment in the pull request.
The problem is there you'd have to list every you have to list everything and then look to see which one that, like there's no search by.
Right, but there's very few GHSAs per repository. So you are doing an extra GET request per submission instead of being able to just modify an existing campaign you already know is present. It's a trade-off between the overhead and complication of persisting versus the downside of hitting the GitHub rate limiter again. Hello, Manoir. I cannot hear you if you're speaking. You are muted still, Manoir.
It's probably a physical mute because you're Zoom.
Sorry, I told you that I'm actually outside, so I'm picking up my son, which was kind of unanticipated. So anyway, I'm just listening right now. So let me just.
Okay. No worries. Now that Manoir is here, Azim, do you want to introduce yourself real fast? Oh, he's reconnecting.
He's forked himself.
You forked yourself, Azim.
No, I had to rejoin because my mic wasn't working. So I hope you guys can hear me now. I had a quick question on the GitHub API limits thing. Did you ever consider like having a GitHub app specifically for this, like a Alpha Omega app or anything of the sort? Because that's also a way for projects to show that they are actively, signing in for getting these PRs, and it'll also help you get away with the API limits.
That is a thought. The problem with using a GitHub app is that we're integrating with Modern, and Modern has its own API GitHub app, and I don't know if you can I don't know if I can use that token as an API. Like you hand Modern an API token and say, here, use this API token to do things for you. And I don't know if you can give it another app's API token to do that. The other thing is that only projects that have agreed to use that app can then use it. And we're trying to generate pull requests for everybody.
Right. I mean, we could also have the fallback option of like, hey, like if you, specifically come in, you probably have some extra features. And if you don't, we can fall back on the default rate limiting. My interactions with GitHub API, I know that it's not too difficult to move between a regular app token and a GitHub app token. So if we have someone on Modern, might be worth considering asking them, like, if they're compatible with app tokens.
So I know from my conversations with Modern that at some point they plan to support campaigns as a native feature. But for now, because they don't, and we don't need them to, like we might want to customize our user experience a little differently. So I think that if people want to use particular Modern campaigns, right, they could potentially sign in and register an account there and set up what campaigns they want to run when that's supported. That's a thought. Yeah, That is, but I hear what you're saying, where maybe some sort of opt-in mechanism where I mean, we're not a company, so we're not offering a service, but most of the time you see this like code cuff, right? You accept your organization into it or whatever, right? Like that's how this thing operates normally.
I mean, the GitHub rate limit is 5,000 requests an hour. Like that's 100,000 requests a day. Like if I get it that each thing requires multiple hits, but
it's not the rate limit in particular that you run into. So so you're saying GitHub, that's the GitHub app rate limit?
that's that should be the authenticated. I think apps is higher than that.
Yes.
But
so for every pull request, it requires 3 API calls. It requires an API call to fork. Sorry, I have this in my documentation. It's the first one is to fork the repository. Then you need to rename the repository. That's 2 API calls, and the third API call is to generate the pull request.
Okay.
So it's three API pull. It's 3 API calls per. And then additionally, if we're adding GHSAs into the flow, it's one to get if the repository is, so then you've got one to say, is there an existing GHSA that's already there? If there it is, grab it. The second one is to create it if it's not, and then so then you got the fork and the push. So then you've got 5 there for GHSAs.
Even if we double that and we say it's going to take 10 credits per, you can still that's still 500 pull requests an hour.
No, it's not, because GitHub has a secondary rate limit that they put in place that's not documented, that says basically if you're doing too many write-based requests too fast, back off. And they give an indeterminate amount of time where you have to back off, and that can be upwards of an hour.
So I think question is, I mean, I think the secondary rate limits is something we hit with scorecard too, and there's no way around it. So
Yes.
the question is, how quickly do we want to roll out these campaigns, right? Like, is there a requirement? Could we roll it out over a few days, maybe, right? Like, do we lose anything by slowing this down?
Well, I'm using GitHub Actions to run these campaigns, and the runtime of a GitHub Actions maximum is 6 hours. So if we can run one campaign in 6 hours, that would be great. Like, from start to end, if it can take, if we can get it under 6 hours per run, that's ideal. Otherwise, we got to start breaking it up into, so my current plan, right, is to run these campaigns at 6 p.m. every every weekday. The problem is that as soon as I use my GitHub account to do this, I actually potentially stop being able to use my GitHub account because it runs against my rate limit. And so I the better solution.
You should have a special account for this. Like, it shouldn't be your personal account.
Well, that's another conversation that's in this document, right? Mm-hmm. That's another one part. So part of this specification and one of the documentation points is that there's an expectation that you use a real person account that's actually an actual GitHub account that's being used and maintained for this work. Like, it has to represent a true person because of the social impact of it. And
so, I mean, this is a side comment in terms of the social impact. I think might be worth considering talking to Dustin Ingram on the like he's on the Ghost team at Google. So they actually did something similar where they went out to try and fix some of these vulnerabilities. I think we should be cautious of how badly people respond if like there is a bot making PRs, because they'll be like, this is spam, right? So yeah, I mean, I think that's a side note, but in terms of the API rate limits, I'm curious to know, like, is there a reason we want to use GitHub Actions? Is it because it's easy? Is that something we can just quickly spin up a GKE cluster for.
I mean, yeah, we can run the script somewhere else. I just the best place for me to launch this thing where I had a something that would run on a scheduled basis is GitHub Actions. I don't particularly care where it runs. I just want to be able to configure it from a repository. Yeah. I mean, eventually this will all run within the Omega triage portal.
Mhm.
Right.
Yep.
And also, and again, at another high level, even beyond all this, is the goal of this working group is to come out with a set of recommendations for how to do this work, so that anybody else can implement it, even if they're not working within the Alpha Omega ecosystem. Like, they can help if they want to contribute directly to Alpha Omega, they can, and use our tooling and infrastructure. But we want to come up with a set of standards for. So the specification document. I don't know if you've seen this yet, Azim. There's a document that I've been working on as a part of this SIG called the OpenSSF Compliant Automated Vulnerability Fix Campaign, which defines what it means to be a campaign that is compliant with this specification, which is the goal is to basically say, this is a set of constraints under which anyone wanting to do this work, no matter what technology stack they're doing, they are compliant with what the OpenSSF suggests if they do these things.
Yeah, I just saw the link for it now.
Yeah.
I've just had a brief look at it, but I'll take a look at it.
Yeah. Did you see, Michael, did you see Xavier's suggestion under 2 mandatory private disclosure?
I'm reading it right now.
He said, so I had to scratch out the whole thing about the top 10,000 critical open source projects, because I said this before, but for those people that didn't catch this before, I didn't realize that the top 10,000 critical projects list was first off unordered, and second off not owned by the critical projects working group. It's an Alpha Omega list. And so the primary thing is, because it's unordered, there is no top 10 within the top 10,000. There is just, it's on the list or off the list. And so my proposal was that we can that and come up with something different. Xavier's perspective or suggestion was the policy being, before going public with this campaign, you must disclose privately a coordinated disclosure to the set of projects for which exploitation in the wild could have significant consequences. You should assess what this set is on a case-by-case basis, and use your judgment to find the right balance between manual work and your automated campaign. It leaves it ambiguous enough, but also a judgment call on behalf of the organization involved in this campaign. Like yeah.
I mean, I guess if it is inevitable that, I mean, so we were talking about this before, but my goal is that the only disclosure that happens is private disclosure, and that being via GitHub private issues where they exist, or the nudge to enable them, or some magical other solution that kind of goes in, and then when all of those fail, the last step on the ladder is full disclosure through a public pull request, and I'm hoping to minimize that to the smallest degree possible, but I recognize that will exist. So I mean, I'm okay with this at a like policy level, I guess.
Anybody else reading this being like, no, bad, or that's good, or any other emotions or thoughts people are having immediately?
So maybe I missed. Do you mind giving me a summary of what Xavier said? Is it that we need to reach out to them to say, hey, do you agree to be part of the campaign? Is that what it is?
No. So the exact wording for the protocol step of mandatory private disclosure, the exact wording he's proposing is, before going public with this campaign, you must disclose privately via coordinated disclosure to the set of projects for which exploitation in the wild would have significant consequences. You should assess what this set is on a case-by-case basis and use your judgment to find the right balance between this manual work and your automated campaign. That's the wording he's proposing for the requirement of mandatory private disclosure.
Seems okay to me.
My initial thoughts, not being super involved in this directly, is just it seems kind of squishy as to what qualifies. And
Yes, it's intentionally that way. It means
Okay.
that it becomes a yes. I mean, and then I also suggested to Xavier that like we can offer the AO project as a resource to help in determining this as well.
Mhm. Yeah, it seems reasonable. And if it's squishy enough where it's up to each researcher, then looks good to me.
I mean,
But we're also okay. So here's the negative scenario of this is somebody drops something on Twitter and says, hey, look, zlib or pick a popular library, so easy to crash or exploit or RCE or whatever. People guys like, did you disclose this? And they're like, I didn't think it was a big deal. Did the guy do anything wrong? The finder, did the finder do anything wrong in that case? If he used his best judgment and he really didn't think that some big important project was actually big or important, and they dropped it as a 0 day, like, do we need more of a guardrail there? And I guess what I'm, so I think I'm not sure if it was you, Jonathan, or Yesenia put together that kind of flow chart, which I really liked. I'm looking for it.
That's the long-term like ideal, but GitHub's API doesn't support it. And also like it's a large flow to policize and require that everybody follow.
Well, but if it's the way I would describe it is, so the premise is this isn't one vulnerability. It's like you have 1,000 of these in 1,000 different repositories, and you're not familiar with any of them. There's no like shortcuts for you. So for each of these 1,000, if they support private vulnerability disclosure, disclose it that way. If they don't, we talked about this, open up an issue saying, hey, I found a serious security issue. I would like to disclose it to you privately. Please enable private vulnerability reporting, and I will report it that way. If I don't hear from you in 35 days or 25, whatever, then I will open up a public pull request. And that way it's minimal work for the maintainer, because that's a one-time kind of workflow config. But also gives the maintainer 2 opportunities to receive it privately. And if they ignore the issue and don't have private vulnerability reporting enabled, then like there's no other, other than like parsing out like security MD files for contacts and now it's manual at that point.
So what do you do if so? I think that the thing that I still struggle with is that there's this goal of what will exist and what currently exists, and those two things have not met each other in the middle yet, and so it's hard to determine what that world will look like. And it's also hard to write policy around things that don't exist yet, even though we hope that they do in a certain way. Okay, so what if so there's 2 concerns that I have. The first one is things don't exist yet. Second concern that I have is by expecting a flow of you must open an issue, then you must wait for a response, then you must, right, you're taking a campaign that could be a one-off run for an individual, right? And turning it into something that in order to automate, you must have long-running automation that is observed, that is not just single cut point in time. It must then operate with some sort of transient recorded history, which makes any campaign's implementation significantly harder. So I see what you're saying as a value, but are we, by requiring additional steps like that, raising the bar to the point where it is almost impossible for someone else to duplicate these efforts unless they use our tooling? Or and if that is the case, is that okay? Like, is that something we want? Or do we want to have a lower barrier to entry for certain researchers to engage in this space? Like, we can have a standard that is above the spec, and we can follow something above the spec, but what do we want to have the specs base be?
I would love if you could just share a Google Doc with a GitHub account, and then you post a link, a private link to that. The maintainer can click on the link, gets authed in, can view the doc, but nobody else can. Like, that's kind of,
You want Hunter Dev.
I want Hunter Dev. Yeah, honestly, I think that in a lot of ways solves this particular issue. I don't think we need to. So here's the thing. I don't know that we need to solve this for the world, for every researcher.
No, what we're proposing is setting a set of policies, and we need to set those policies. We need to set a baseline at least, and we can do it better than that. But this is what we define as the Open Source Security Foundation best practice policy. Or actually, it's a specification. So are you compliant with the specification or not?
Right.
And so just to kind of recap my perspective on this. So the idea is if you follow this policy, you can put the OSSF name on it so that you have more backing or looks more legit coming in for maintainers.
Yes.
So the requirement should be the baseline to not cause problems for the OSSF if somebody uses their name to do a bulk campaign like this.
Correct. So do we want to make it? So first off, if we require private vulnerability disclosure as a step, as a part of this flow, we are preventing this specification from being applicable to Bitbucket and GitLab. Unless we make a carve out for vendor specific. Unless we say, for these vendors, you must do it this way, and for these vendors, you must do it this way. Or
with the caveat of if supported.
Yeah,
You must.
if supported, do it this way. If not supported, do it this way. Yeah, so it could be vendor agnostic, but be very heavily hinted towards.
In the top 10,000 lists, it's almost all of them are GitHub, by the way.
Yes, I agree. Yes.
And also, I think as a policy, you know, the policy versus process. So the underlying, like, great, I need to report privately to GitHub. What does that mean in GitHub? It means you know, it means this little sub workflow. I have Bitbucket. I have just a website and an email address. I like everything else. There could be different, and we could actually say that, you know what, we can't automate the random person's website with, you know, just a link to a tar file on there as the way, because we don't know how to automate that for those types of projects. So they're not included in this in these campaigns, or we can only do that manually if we have the cycles or whatever, you know, we want to do it. But I agree. I agree with the one more. Yeah, if this is all GitHub, let's solve for. Let's keep the policy solving generally, knowing that we're only going to really implement GitHub, and then if everybody moves to Bitbucket, we'll obviously like implement and support Bitbucket, or you know, over time it will take a pull request.
One final wrench is if we are we is the group leaning towards stating that the baseline is to require an attempt at private vulnerability disclosure? Michael, that seems to be what you're aiming for. And does anybody have any other opinions?
I'll abstain.
I just think it adds an additional amount of. I think that it adds an additional hurdle to being valid, being compliant. Is that, do we want to be for? Is there value? Do we think in having this requirement, given the additional overhead that it will require for any campaign operator to do?
I think the value would probably come from not having maintainers complain very loudly about having a public disclosure.
I have another question. How upset will maintainers be if, as a part of this, they find out that what we disclosed in an automated way is not a vulnerability, but it's just a security hardening? Now you falsely flagged it as something that they needed to be more serious about, or because it looks like it's getting merged from a GHSA, looks like a security issue, but is now they determine not a security issue.
But wouldn't they simply not publish it?
They wouldn't publish it, but it still merges, and when the merge comes in, the commit has the GHSA name on it, so it looks like it came from a GHSA.
I mean, if we're submitting, if we or anybody else are submitting kind of garbage vulnerabilities, I would expect that they would push back on that, and rightfully so. And we can say, you know, sorry, you know, we're not perfect. Thanks for, you know, helping us get better. I think that's okay. I mean, if all of our stuff is garbage, then that's a completely different story. We shouldn't be doing it, but
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Final question. What do we do if there are projects that, for example, there are certain Apache Software Foundation projects that don't use GitHub issues for issue tracking? They use Jira. How do we handle this flow for projects that have intentionally disabled issues for a repository? Single line change pull request just to do it via the GitHub way and tell them that it's not a pull request, but that we wanted them to enable.
And
That's
can you have pull requests enabled but issues not? I thought.
Yes, you can.
Oh, interesting.
definitely can.
It's a terrible solution.
Yeah.
But-
Apache is special in some way. Are there lots of others like Apache though, or can we just solve for Apache as a one-off?
I think having issues disabled is not an uncommon scenario.
Okay. How about this? Let's try to handle those manually for the first 3 months. See how it is. If we have to do those, you know, 3 times in 3 months, then it's probably not a big deal. If we have to do them 200 times in 3 months, then it's not sustainable, and we need to think harder.
What's the policy?
Policy.
What's the policy? Like, sure, great. AO can do that. What's the policy though?
For projects that have issues disabled, the finder should exercise reasonable care in finding another way to disclose.
Like we're already trying to convince them to turn on GHSAs, or like, right?
Well,
Like, right, we're
yeah.
trying to convince them to turn on turn on this feature.
Mhm.
If you're doing it manually, is can you file an issue in Jira? I mean, you're doing it manually, so.
Well, no, we're trying to avoid as much manual stuff as possible.
No, but as Michael said, it's an empirical evidence of like in the 3 months, do you encounter it 3 times or 200 times? If you encounter it 200 times, then eventually you'll automate it. But for now, since the idea is to do it manually or see like how it goes, how it pans out, then if you have access to if you have the capability of filing Jira issues, issue tickets, then you can just go ahead and do that.
How about this? How about if they don't have issues enabled and you can reasonably determine that this project is not so like this ties into 2, right? Mandatory private disclosure. If widespread exploitation of that project is not relevant, then just do a pull request and saying, hey, in the future, if you don't want to get this via pull request, turn on private vulnerability disclosure.
So I'm curious, are we looking, I mean, kind of echoing what Jonathan said some time back, right? Like maybe we are plugging in things that like features that don't exist today and making them required. Do you folks feel like that's happening? Like, are some of these policies written assuming that these features will be available in the future, and we have made that it's a requirement from today? Which seems pretty.
I think as of, well, so private vulnerability reporting is available today. The APIs will be public tomorrow. So
Half the APIs will be public tomorrow.
Okay, got it. So there's no technical reason why any GitHub repository could not enable it, but because it is opt-in, like we all know what that does. But over time, like I expect that number to only increase, and we should have a kind of I think an OpenSSF campaign to, hey, turn on private vulnerability reporting would be great from a using our kind of pulpit to do that.
So sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
Like I guess my point is, since I'm assuming we are writing this policy for the person who's actually going to be disclosing the vulnerability, right? So should we be writing the policy to say, if you have means to disclose this or message this in an automated way, then it is a requirement on you. Else, I mean, it's more of a recommendation and it's basically optional. Because I think we it's still pretty new, so I don't know how difficult it's going to be for somebody to go and do this manually, if they have to even do it manually.
Yeah.
So let me
So I just had a quick question. The APIs are going to be available tomorrow as in tomorrow in future, or tomorrow as in tomorrow?
Tomorrow is in tomorrow. Kate Catlin. The reason that they're not up today is because GitHub's merge queue got backed up.
Okay, interesting. Okay, thank
so
you.
The API will support the following functionality. On release, it will support the ability to get all security advisories against a repository for repo maintainers, triage, draft, and published. For anybody else, only published security advisories. And then you can get a security advisory, get a specific security advisory via the ID. You can patch a security advisory by putting a patch request against that API. And then post will create an advisory in a repository. And then you can set credits, and then there's also webhooks. So the webhooks that it'll support are on publish of a security advisory, and if a new private vulnerability report is submitted. So it enters the triage state. that's for maintainers.
Okay, cool.
Yes.
I just had a random thought. Going back to like how you like your kind of traditional way of doing this, where you create the GHSA in your account, give the maintainer access to that. Is there a like?
There's no API currently to give you a list of all of the maintainers for a repository because it creates a channel by which maintainers can get spammed. You can tell whether or not a maintainer is a maintainer of a project by looking at the GitHub issues and seeing the tag that shows up on their name, but I don't know if that's available by the API or not. So the way that I don't know what heuristic Hunter Dev is using to determine which projects are maintain or who is a maintainer and who's not. But there is no like these are the people that are the maintainers for this project API call for repositories.
Oh.
Yep.
I think there is such an API, but it probably needs much higher scopes, like maybe admin scope or something. Like an org admin should be able to.
Oh
figure
yeah,
out-
no, org admins can definitely figure that out, but not riffraff. Um. Um. If the it's not enabled on a repository, then an issue must be asking if the maintainer does not respond, not within 35 days, a public pull request may be open. Fix the vulnerability.
Okay, so to come back to this. So this URL here, and I'm sorry to take us down the rabbit hole, but like, so API.GitHub repos Madler's zlib. The full name of it is Madler zlib. The owner login is Madler, and the type of that owner is a user.
Correct.
I wonder if can I infer that Madler, if you granting access to Madler, is the right thing there, as different than like if I do this for Apache, the type is going to be organization, and the Apache user is probably not the one you want.
Yes, you can. Yes, well, I mean, the user is not Apache. That Apache is an organization.
Right. But I'm thinking for open source projects, if 80% of them, the owner is a user, and you can tell the owner from the repo, then does that solve it for 80%?
I don't think it's 80%.
Yeah, I'm curious where that 80% number is coming from.
I mean, if let me look at this real fast. So there's something like 30,000. Okay, so Apache, there are 1,011 Apache Software Foundation repositories.
Mhm.
The Foundation has 208, Google has 181, Gradle has 53, Microsoft 131, Spring 103. These are, let's see, 21 US government, Wildfly 15. Out of 31,000. Yeah, maybe. I don't know whether or not.
You know what we could do? How about this? Take the list of our top 10,000, because we have a lot of GitHub repos there, and just look them all up and see what the percentage of them that has where the owner is a user, not an organization. And if that number is compelling, then we investigate further, and if it's not, then we say, oops.
So you're saying, so what your proposal, I presume, is we fork the repository, we enable private vulnerability reporting, we use our fork as the source of the private vulnerability report, and put the report there and invite the upstream maintainer's account to it.
Either that, or use the and I don't know if this is even possible, but use the GHSA, like you have your own repo, you create a new GHSA as a way to make a private message. So you say, hey folks, here are the details of the thing. Grant the owner of the other one access to it. They'll get the notification, and with the assumption that they will publish their own advisory, but now you've communicated with them privately.
You want to generate the fix too, because otherwise you're spamming them.
Yeah, and I guess you can't have a private fork of a public repository, can you?
Hey, kind of. You could any repository you can create a public fork, and then from the public fork create a GHSA and invite someone to. You can create GHSAs against forks.
The branch is private in that case.
No, the branch is public. The branch is public, but the branch of the branch is private.
Got it. Right.
Sorry, the fork of the no, not the branch of the branch. The fork of the fork is private. Yes.
The vessel with the pestle. Yeah.
I have actually so one of the things that I ran into is a real issue is that you can't if you have two repositories that both originate from the same fork. So you have a fork, you have A, and A depends upon B. You can't fork in an organization, you can't fork both A and B. You GitHub doesn't let you fork A and B. So so basically you can't generate, if you've got two main projects, like one of them that might be slightly ahead or behind, and you want to generate a security fix event against both of them, you've either got to normalize that central repository against both of them and do two different pull requests from that central repository, and that seems like a nightmare, or generate the second pull request from another organization.
Got it.
Oh, also, one of the things that I've told people in this is something that I cover in, I don't know if I cover this in my talk. All the forks that I've been generating for pull requests come from an organization instead of a repository. Problem with that I just found out as a recent thing, apparently pull requests originating from organizations don't support enabling allow edits from maintainers. I heard somewhere that was disabled because if a maintainer can make a change to an organization account, I presume that they can push a change to a repository or to that branch and then force credentials out of that organization via a custom GitHub action.
Oh, right. Yeah, because when a maintainer edits
they're editing a
branch, they're editing somebody else's branch. Yeah, that
I think so. Supposedly they
makes sense.
Yeah, so supposedly they disabled
Yeah.
support for that.
Yep. Cool.
Like it's completely gone, or you have to do the approve then run?
No, like I think that checkbox doesn't work when the pull request originates from an organization. Which means that either you generate the pull request from your personal account, which means your personal account gets bloated with 1 billion forks, which I have done. I have almost 1,000 forks against I have 1,000 repositories plus against my GitHub account. And then I stopped doing that and started generating the forks against an organization instead, so they go away or somewhere else.
Yeah, it seems to conflict with having the human facing side of.
Well, yeah, it's I'm not doing something. I mean, this whole group is about doing something that GitHub has not seen before. And like, it's okay. Just, yeah. Manwar, are you generating the forks against an organization, or are you generating them against the GitHub account?
I have to check on that. I don't remember. It's probably, I mean, because we were doing it only for a small, I mean, compared to the scale that you are doing it, it's on a much smaller scale, and that too for the POC. So that's why I think it was mostly done like, yeah, not on the organizations, but I have to check.
Okay. Okay. We are at 3 minutes past. I think the only other thing that I want to talk about is opting out real fast. There's a discussion that's going on with Michael. What is the current status of the spec that Luigi is working on, that JSON spec?
I think it's ready for like broader use and comment. I mean, it's not widely used yet, but I think that's there's just need, elbow grease to get the word out and get organizations to start adopting it. I'm certainly going to start advocating for it.
There is, so 2 things. One, we wanted to add a specification field on that thing to determine like, instead, so the current way that I've been allowing people to opt out is via a robots.txt file they drop in their .github repository. And if we can instead encourage opting in, opting out, primarily opting out via requiring that file to be present, then it'll force some level of adoption, even if they're opting out, which would be kind of sad, but also positive at the same time.
Yep, I think that would be great, and having that it just accepts bot pull requests, true or false. Yeah,
I don't like that quite because it's too granular. It needs to be more, it needs to be named. Like you need to be able to enable or disable, like
I'm getting kicked out. I'll see if
yeah. I'm thinking it needs to be more granular and be name supported.
so like accepts bot pull requests from
AO.
no one, everyone, or list of.
Yeah, kind of.
Not
No one,
listed.
everyone, or list of, and then the list of is either a wildcard list or something that's it's like it's like a robots.txt file, right? It's something more,
I'm okay with that. I'll take a look at the PR in Security Insight spec.
Please do. Can you post that in the Autofix?
Yeah,
channel?
I'll post it there too. Yep.
All right. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
See you in 2 weeks. Yeah.
Adios.
Cheers. Bye.
See ya.